Hey everyone, welcome back to Williamson Ridge Outdoors. Today we're going to be taking a look at this DeWalt chop saw. This is a D28715. And kind of what brought this on, I was wanting to get into a little bit of metal work and being able to fabricate some very simple things and weld a few things, that kind of stuff. And I need a good way to cut it. And the reason for that, you can use a grinder, and I have used a grinder, but the grinder is very difficult to get exact same length time and time again. And the project that I'm currently working on, I need at least 5 pieces the same exact length to make sure that what I'm building comes out perfectly square. Plus the cuts need to be square themselves. So if you've got, like with an angle grinder and you're cutting that, especially freehand, I can't get that perfectly square. So you got one side of a piece of angle iron that's a little bit shorter than the other side, and then the length overall is actually a little bit different on each one. It's just really tough for me to get it perfect every single time. So I thought this would help get it really, really close. And the reason I ended up choosing this DeWalt, when I first started looking for a chop saw, then I ended up, I was trying to just find the cheapest thing because I don't know how much I'm going to use this. And I don't want to have a real expensive tool just sitting around in the garage never getting used. So I started looking at Harbor Freight. They had some about $140. And then I found the DeWalt and it was only $199. So I thought, well, for the price difference, I'm going to go ahead with DeWalt because, I have a lot of DeWalt tools and I've been very happy with them. So I figured I'd pay that little extra and get the DeWalt. So we're going to open this thing up, put it together, and try it out and see how it works. So I was thinking there might have been some assembly required on this, but there is not. It's just got these foam pieces on its feet, and everything is together. It's ready to use. So a few of the features on a saw like this that kind of differentiates it from other types of saws is that it's designed specifically to cut those harder materials like steel. And so if you've got a piece of steel you need to clamp into place, it's actually got a clamp on here so that you're not putting your hand in here and trying to hold that piece of steel. You can clamp it down and lock it into place, and then that way it's good and secure when you're trying to cut it. And one cool thing about this though, you can just flip this latch and adjust this freely to the size piece you need, and then you just turn it back down whenever you need to clamp it down, and then that locks it into place. Also, this does have a miter adjustment. You can angle the pieces. Now I've seen some saws where some folks have made a cut on an angle, and I guess maybe the blade angles on those saws, but they actually cut into the table on it. Well, this saw actually, the main section of the saw is stationary, and you angle the table itself in order to cut, say, a 45. So only the guide, or the brace here, actually changes angle, and the blade stays exactly the same. So I'm just going to square a guide up here. I'm going to slide it back, and I'm going to square it up. So that way anything I'm laying across through here should be pretty well square to the blade. So what I ended up doing on this actually is not squaring it with the table, but squaring it with the blade. When I actually squared it with the guide here, with the table, the slot in the table, it was actually off a little bit. So I actually went ahead and pulled the blade down and squared it up to the blade just to make sure that the blade itself actually, we've got a good square hold and a square cut. working out pretty good. And I tell you what, I was actually really disappointed the first several cuts that I made with this saw. They just weren't square. They weren't even square with the blade. Like the table and everything was square. But let me show you what I found out, or why that it was not cutting square. And the cut, as you would go, you would start off square and then it would kind of just veer off and get out of square. So let me show you what I found out. So this is the factory blade that came on this, on the saw from Lowe's. I thought that since it was cutting so terribly bad that I was like, well, I'm gonna try to change the blade and we'll see how that goes, because when you pulled the trigger, you could see the blade have some wobble to it. That just didn't seem right. I was like, well, surely the blades are supposed to be straight. I mean, I have no experience with a saw like this, and I didn't know exactly what to expect. But I'll try to see if I can get you some footage of this. I'll put it down here at the piece. Maybe you can see this. So as this blade comes to a stop, there's no side-to-side movement in it. It's almost perfect. Now I'm going to change the blade and put the factory one back on it and show you what that looks like. So I don't know how well you'll actually be able to see this on the camera. But that blade is way out of round or square. The blade does this number whenever it's running. And that's the factory blade that came on it. And that made those cuts way out of square. And it would make the blade actually run, like you'd start to cut square and then it would run out the side because that blade's doing this as it's turning. So I changed it, and that actually fixed the problem completely. Let me show you the difference even in the cuts. So this is the cut with the good blade. It looks good, straight, and square. This is a cut with the other blade, the first blade. And even look at how much the steel, like the blade got to the point where you had to put a lot of pressure on it to get it to even cut. And it just wouldn't cut it even square. I'd say that saw works out pretty good. Here's some of the pieces that I've cut. And as you can see, they're not 100% perfect, but they're pretty good. They're off just by a little bit. You could grind that just a little bit on a grinding wheel or whatever and kind of finish flushing those up, but they're pretty close, not perfect. I think one of the main things I'm going to do is actually change that blade again, or that cutting wheel. These actually aren't called blades on these saws, but the cutting wheel. They make a heavier one, but I don't know for sure if it's designed to work with this saw or not. I know it is purposely built for like the gas-powered saws, like the concrete cutting saws and all that kind of stuff. But that blade is a little bit thicker and a lot more rigid than what it is on this. So I'm curious to see whether that one would actually work and make these cuts a little bit more square, because that blade, even though this blade is better than the other one as far as the movement, when you put pressure on it, you can still see that blade give and flex a little bit. And that's causing the cuts not to be 100% square every single time, because it actually will let that blade run a little bit side to side.